kind of got me pinned in here. So that
Hey, pass the gavel? What are you talking about?
Brian, we ready?
I've come to rely on most of this is the kids. Did you read through that? I did. I didn't read it. It's pretty solid.
Okay, got you. Okay, gotcha. Perfect. Okay, I would like to call to order the July 11th meeting of the State Board of Education. Please call the roll.
here. Dr. Freitas.
Yes.
Present. Here.
Present.
Here.
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 Superintendent McCormick.
Here.
Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
The agenda is written. Have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So ordered. Is there approval of the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So ordered. Any board member comments or reports?
Yeah. Just a quick report. We held our first meeting of the committee looking into virtual charters, received a significant amount of background, and we are scheduling our second meeting here in a couple weeks, so that notice will go up on the board website shortly.
Other board member comments? Yes, sir.
I just wanted to comment and commend the schools up in Elkhart County, and I know we've mentioned them a lot, but back in June on the 15th, on Friday, the 15th of June, Horizon Education Alliance held their showcase of pathways that their schools have done, and I know we use the term pathways a lot, but for this, it was 47 programs that they had done in schools where literally the school partnered with a business and industry person or business and industry to create programs for their students for them to learn in a relevant context. And they had those showcased there, had the opportunity to visit with students and visit with some companies. In the future, we're going to have in August, one of those come forward as a best practice, but it was a great thing, and I want to commend them on all the work that they're doing. They truly are putting this together and putting the package together of bringing business and industry and that knowledge that they bring. Really interesting to talk to the kids about how they enjoyed interacting with the adults and learning from the adults and what they knew. So just wanted to call that out because I think that's some great work that they're doing that others could look to as a best practice.
Mr. Chairman, I don't recall the last time the State Board of Education has met in Northwest Indiana. At least in the 7 years I've been following it, I don't think we've ever had a meeting there. And I know sometimes we take this show on the road, so I'd like to, just on the record, put out a request that we try to get a meeting of the State Board of Education scheduled up in Northwest Indiana.
That would Railcats game?
Cubs?
Any other board member comments? Seeing none. Dr. McCormick, I apologize. Did you have a statement?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, yes. We have no public comment, correct? Best practices. J School Corporation.
Good morning.
Morning.
This is similar to our Batesville presentation last meeting. Jay County submitted an LCP application. The review team, as we were reading through the application, realized that the pathway they submitted was not only achievable under the current 8 bullets that the state board has approved, but actually goes above and beyond those. In the pathway, the students are able to be a CT concentrator, earn an industry recognized credential, earn dual credits, and also have a strong work-based learning experience due to Jay County's strong partnership with their manufacturing. So I'm going to turn it over to them to let them speak, but that's how we came to having Jay as a recognized best practice.
Welcome.
First of all, thank you for having us today. Jay County is a very rural county in northeastern Indiana. We are a one high school county. We have about 1,000 students in our high school population. With me today is Rusty Inman. He is Executive Director of the John Jay Center for Learning, which is an adult education facility. Also joining us today was Lisa Deck from Sboe. I'm not sure she's here yet, but she is part of our presentation also. So I'm going to let Rusty kind of talk to you for a minute about how our program began, because it was truly generated by the manufacturers and the needs of the manufacturers in our community. And then hopefully Lisa will arrive and we'll let her talk about Sboe and Sboe's involvement with this process. And then I'll kind of bring it home with, here's what we're doing at the high school level, and here's kind of where we see ourselves going. So, Rusty?
Thank you. Like Chad said, I'm Rusty Inman. I'm the director at a place called John Jay Center for Learning in Portland. So we get started. I have a little bit of a presentation. When the former governor, now vice president, was in Jay County at one point, he made this comment. I'm sure he made this comment before, but that every student deserves the same opportunities for success, whether they want to go to college or start their career out of high school. It's not about a plan A or plan B, but 2 plan A's. To advance the principle that all work is honorable work. So we agreed with that. And so here's where we are. We're the blue spot there. That's Jay County. To the west is a red county. That's Blackford. We're both small, rural, declining population. Good schools. I mean, these were some of the obstacles that we had. I mean, some of the goods and the bads. Good schools, but high free and reduced lunch. Great graduation rate. Not a lot of people going to college. Some CTE programs that were available, but not necessarily matching what was out there. So I started my job as director about 5 years ago, and I was told by my board of directors, we have 15,000 square feet in the basement, nothing's going on, find something to do with it. So knowing what I knew, 50% or more of the jobs in Jay County were manufacturing related. I went to manufacturers. I had 8 appointments, and I said, what do you need from us? And I heard the same thing 4 times in a row, which was baby boomers are aging out and taking a lot of knowledge with them, not in completely, but in a big way. The industrial arts classes have been taken out of high school. We don't know where the talent's going to come for some of these specialized jobs. So I heard it 4 times. I canceled 4 meetings after that, because there's a time to talk and there's time to go to work. So it was time to go to work. So what we did is we went and we looked, and the first thing that we did is we gathered our manufacturers. We had 18 come one day 20 to that meeting, and said, this is what we want to do. We want to bring this back to high school. And we talked about the Codexis Indiana program, and we asked for a show of hands. Give us a 1, 2, 3. 1, this is bad. 2, we can live with this. 3, it's the greatest thing we've ever seen. lot of twos, some threes, no ones. We moved forward. We got the Connexus back in high school. That was 4 years ago. That was in 2014. We started that conversation. Then we started talking about adults. We talked and we looked at the Ivy Tech system. We looked at the Vincennes system. And then we're a border county. So Salina, Ohio, has a Wright State University Lake campus. They had an industrial maintenance program because that was the big call from our manufacturers was industrial maintenance, more skilled labor. So we went and we looked and we showed our manufacturers, this is all end user driven. So we looked at the manufacturers, told them, what do you want from us? And we'll go find it and we'll make this happen. 100% agreed they wanted that Wright State system because it's competency based, it is work at your own pace, it is working adult, you know, it had a proven track record that with working adults in mind, but there was some college credit that went along with it. So that was the thing, and that was our goal was you know, are we teaching the right skills at the right time, and will this lead to manufacture or to employment? And right now, you know, when we went and looked at the adult part, our manufacturing council between Jay and Blackford counties, it's 18 different companies. There's 2 different school corporations. There are 2 local economic development corporations that we're all getting input from the manufacturers to build what we're building and what we're teaching. So this is a bit of a timeline. I mean, it's taken us 4 years to be a overnight success, you know. So because when you look at the next page, since January, this is when we opened for the adults. And we've got 46 students in a very short period of time, which is phenomenal, to be quite honest with you. And we have 2 different companies that are working through the process of bringing us 10 more each. We've got some Work Indiana money that we've tapped into. And I mean, we're going to be between 75 and 100 by the end of the year. And again, this is a rural county. If we go back a couple slides, what we found from the cell data was, you know, again, we're a little green spot over there, but these are the hot spots that cell recognized from across the state. A lot of stuff up north in Elkhart, a lot of stuff in Indianapolis, over around Purdue, down southern Indiana, where there's a lot of big industry. And then there's lonely old us over to the side doing what we're doing. But it's all industry driven. I mean, they're leading the pathway. But I mean, we're drawing students from 8 counties right now, including 2 counties in Ohio. So we've blurred that line, almost erased that line to bring people over. So we've become a regional place, and you know, we were able to do this from it's $1 million investment in equipment. That we were a Skill Up 2 recipient. We also had a lot of help with Cell, with some of their grant money to help us build a plan and then to move forward with that. So this is the part where Lisa takes over.
She is here, I guess, in the building, but I'm going to fast forward so that. So 2014, I was just starting my first year as principal at Jay County High School after being 6 years in the dean's office. And my superintendent comes to me, who sits on Mr. Inman's board, and says, we need to bring manufacturing back to Jay County High School. What we learned when we studied the Department of Workforce Development data was that if you're in Jay County, you have a 70% chance of working in manufacturing, healthcare, or agriculture. So as we look at the new graduation pathways, what are we going to focus on? Those 3 areas. Because we know that our students that are going to graduate and stay in our community have a 70% chance of working in one of those areas. We have a very robust agricultural program. We have 4 full-time ag teachers. We have one of the largest FFAs in the state. So we feel like we have agriculture handled pretty well. We have 2 teachers who teach health care courses. We have, I believe, 3 different pathways in the healthcare industry. We have 26 pathways total in our high school. We're very proud of that. The one thing we were missing was manufacturing. And so when Rusty came to us and said, we need to get this going, these were the areas that we initially said we want to bring to Jay County High School. We had a robotics program. They were pretty competitive already, so that was a quick win for us. We know that those skills are very closely related to what's going on in manufacturing, the problem solving, the critical thinking. And so we tried to build around that success with those kids. And so that was kind of the start to us, and how do we give them work opportunities, and then how do we eventually integrate them with adults and get factories working. And so one thing I think is important to know is this was all driven by employers, from the curriculum, the equipment purchase, the instructors, and then anything we do in the future, we do because that board, that manufacturing council has encouraged us to do so. They'll come in and talk to our kids, bring them on tours of the facilities. We try to expose them to as much as we can in their time with us. We utilize the Work Keys test as juniors to show some of the areas where they're more proficient, maybe some of the careers they might be more interested in. Counseling is an important part of what we do with our students. So at Jay County High School, you're going to take as a freshman preparing for college and careers. We're looking at moving that down into the 7th and 8th grade, but at this point it's still in our high school curriculum. And then from there, as a sophomore, you will take a semester-long kind of intro to manufacturing, where they give you a little taste of everything. And here are the different opportunities within that profession. During that time, you will take the Six Sigma certification. As a junior, now you're in what's truly level 1. A lot of safety. The MSSC certification is part of that. Both your sophomore and junior year, there are Ivy Tech credits available to you. And then in your senior year, we are going to send you, starting in January for us, to the John Jay Center for Learning. You're going to go into the lower level, and you're going to work on the skills track certification. And the thing that was appealing to us was that there are lab requirements, so there's a lot of hands-on activities available for the kids. The plan is, from our employers, is to have them in the factories a couple days a week working, and in the lab the other days of the week completing these labs. And our employers are telling us that that will lead to job opportunities within their factories. So we're excited about the opportunity to get the adults and the students working together. I think when you're talking about mentoring and teaching those employability skills for our students to interact with working professionals in that area, is going to be nothing but positive. And so what I tried to provide you here with some data over the last couple of years. We had last school year 115 students enrolled in our manufacturing curriculum. That's roughly 10%. I told you that for us, 70% is healthcare, ag, manufacturing. We're not happy about this. This is a number we're looking to improve. 10% is great, and it's a good start. And again, we're just getting into this, but this is always an area where we're looking to get our students more involved in. We have 26 students in the second level. 5 of them earned an industry recognized certification. That's not as easy as it sounds. And I think across the state, about 3 to 5% of students are actually earning an industry certification. And so it's a difficult task, but it's something that we push our students to do. With 25 of the 26 students earn at least 1 dual credit. A lot of them get out of there with about 18 dual credits just in manufacturing. And so the students that are committed to that pathway and know that that's what they want to do when they graduate are halfway to an associate degree when they leave us. And so we're pretty proud of that. What you notice in the bottom slide is that the 2017 number for students going right into the workforce is a little bit lower. Well, what we're finding is we've had an increased number in students actually going to Ivy Tech, going to the University of Northern Ohio, going to Wright State University, and actually working toward a degree. And so I think we get them a pretty good start, and now they have options. They have some Ivy Tech credits, they're going to have some Wright State credits, but they also have the skills and the networking within the industry to go right to work should they choose to do so. And then for us, probably next school year, middle of next school year, we're going to get back together with the council, and these are some questions we're going to ask. Are we meeting your needs? Are we starting to fill the voids that you have? Are they coming in with the right skills? And the end goal for us, obviously, is to provide those students with the best opportunity to maximize their dollars when they graduate. And so are we raising the income level in our county? Because we're producing now skilled workers. And so we're very proud of the work we've done, but I'll tell you, it's 4 years in the making. It's a lot of hours, it's a lot of people involved, and it's been a very rewarding process to see our students now going back to work, making a very livable wage in Jay County. And so I appreciate the teachers and the flexibility. We took an ag teacher who had some industry experience, and we were able to get him licensed to teach manufacturing. If he leaves us, we're in trouble because we're going to have to go try to find somebody to fill that void. And so that's always a concern for us. As you know, programs are only as good as the people running them. And we're fortunate that we have some great people in Jay County, and we're very proud of the work we've done. So, again, I appreciate the opportunity. I'm going to turn it over to Lisa now, and we'll go back and let her talk about sales involvement with us.
Thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here today to talk with all of you and kind of share a little bit of the work that's happening across the state. EWIN is Education Workforce Innovation Network, and our goal is to help with systematic change with career pathways. We actually do, our mission is basically to focus on communities and collaboratives and help build out these networks and to raise up awareness and to be able to build out these realities that's happening in our economy and increase our post-secondary attainment. So with that, we are a not-for-profit, and we basically we're grant funded, and with our grant funding, we reallocate that to communities through an RFP process. And Jay County and Jay Blackford was one of our recipients in 2016. So we provided them with technical assistance, and it was helping them to build out this manufacturing pathway. And I can say that as we look across the state of Indiana and as we look at the different communities and what they're working on, there's a lot of great pockets of work happening. But what we also see is that the importance of being able to, again, and you'll hear me say this time and time again, that systematic change so that it's sustainable and that we are able to continue to be innovative and build off of that to grow our communities. So that's just a snapshot of some things that are some areas that we've worked in and we continue to work in to be able to expand that out. One of the things that, as you look at the grad pathways and the importance of Indiana moving forward in being able to look at options for our students, these frameworks that we work on and that we provide the technical assistance for is we really want to start in preschool and start looking at that career awareness and be able to build out all the way up to that post-secondary degree. We take our grantees and other people in Indiana to study best practices and look at what we can implement within our own areas and regions. We have not found across the United States, we have found some awesome things that's happening and even some international best practices. But we also believe that there is nothing that can just be cookie-cutted and brought back and plopped into a community. And I think that's where I really have been so proud of what Rusty and Chad's group have accomplished, because they built it from within their community. And they had that business engagement at the table from the very beginning to see that through. And that's what's going to be critical as you work in these other communities and we start looking at building out these systems. We know that the word pathway is misused at times. I mean, we use it for lots of things. But what we really want to do, again, is stick with that systematic piece of it and not really looking at pigeonholing anyone, but we're looking at providing opportunities and giving our students options as they move forward. So quickly, we at eWin, we go with this philosophy. We call it our wheel, and it's really this hallmark of exemplary pathways and partnerships. And we start with data and we end with data. We tell every community that you need to do some research and find out exactly what it is that we need. We have data points in place in the state of Indiana, but we also know it doesn't always tell the whole story. So we start with that. We also want to bring in those community stakeholders, business leaders, and educators to confirm, if you will, the data. And then that's when we start really looking at building out those collaborative teams. To be an eWin planning grant recipient, you have to have 3 things in place. You have to have the partnerships, you have to have education, you must have business, and you must have a community stakeholder willing to come to the table and start having these deep conversations. When that is established, that's when we start looking at those in-demand employer skills. What is it that we actually are trying to build out? And I'm sure all of you sitting on this panel know that we have to be planning for 5 to 10 years out, not just for Monday morning. I was in manufacturing for 13 years before I switched over to more of an education and workforce development role. And I always said there was a lot of times we planned for Monday morning, whether it was in a recession or whether it was in a time where things were really booming. And we have to get past that. And so that's part of what that in-demand employer skill piece of this wheel is all about. And then we start the pathway design. And we have to have business at the table, we have to have education at the table, and they have to be talking to each other, because a lot of times what we see is people are doing this, right? They're pointing at each other saying, that's business's job, business is saying this is education's job, and we don't let that happen any longer. So, and these guys can also attest that we made them have hard conversations. And there was times where you have to say, okay, I need you to stop and listen, educators, listen to your business partners, and vice versa. So that's what that piece of the wheel is. And then, of course, we talk about the marketing and the community piece of it in the aspect of, if we don't tell people what's going on and we don't educate parents and we don't educate the people around us, you can't sell it. All right, and you're not going to be able to get students in it or be able to grow it, and that's the key to it all. So again, that's really what we do with eWin. I'm very proud of the work that has taken place in several of our communities. As you saw, we've been in well over 17 counties doing specific planning grant work, but with the deep dives, we've actually touched close to 30 counties now. And I hope to see that work continue as we build out and share best practices such as J. Blackford County and the work that's happening.
Questions by board members? Byron,
So first of all, I want to commend you on this because A, you started 4 years ago. Hopefully what we've done with the graduation pathways has codified the work that you're doing and opened more doors for you. It sounds like with manufacturing that did give you some emphasis to do that work. I think it's interesting, a couple of things. One, your data, as it looks like more students, instead of just going into manufacturing, as we used to look at that, right? Which we know is a great career, but some of them are going into colleges and different things. It amazes me when we give students options, which is what you said. It amazes me when we let the student have some currency in that and some say in that. It amazes me how they find out they can do a whole lot more than what they thought, right? And I think that's something we need to point out and really celebrate with this, right? It'll be interesting to see how your data comes out and what that looks like moving forward. Couple of questions. For the 46 adults, are those incumbent workers or are those workers that are unemployed presently? What I think you kind of covered, but I'm interested, as I've been now out meeting with industry, those are some discussions that come up, and I'm just kind of interested about that.
So 46 students, 10 self-pay, so that means, well, that number's wrong because we added one yesterday. We have 47 now. So 10 self-pay. So that means 37 are being paid for, their tuition being paid for by their company. So they have jobs.
Okay.
Everyone in the program has a job, but they're mostly underemployed, the ones that are self-pay. But, I mean, they see the value of this, and they're willing to put their own money on the table to go from a $12 an hour job to a $25 an hour job. You want to talk about life-changing with about a $2,500 investment to get the first 2 levels, and companies say, we'll hire them and we'll pay for them to go through the rest of this. And now that we have Work Indiana money, there's going to be even less out of pocket, and, you know, we're just deepening the talent pool.
So it's a mix, and you're looking
Yes.
at both. Can I continue? I got like 3 others here, please, since I got the 4. Is that okay? I'm kind of acting like you a little bit. So
You were going to do it anyway.
that is true, but I just want your blessing. So I want to dig in a little bit on the 3 to 5% certifications, right? Because some people, I think, they're like, wow, only 3 to 5% of their. So would you say, I'm going to editorialize here a little bit. I would say that you truly are doing what concentrators were set out to have done in the CTE world, where you're actually teaching courses that are related to the industry they're going into, right? Novel idea. But you're actually teaching those courses related to that. We really haven't had that. I would say, again, pockets, right? So I don't want to say we haven't had that. Please don't anyone hear me. But don't you think that will, and I'm asking you to speculate here. And I know lawyers, that's not good, but I don't
do it.
Speculate for me a little bit. As you begin to really dig into this, and you've got those concentrators happening, don't you think that will increase, though? The amount of certifications?
Well, I'll be honest with you, our manufacturers who are leading this pathway, or leading the charge here, they're not interested in certification.
Okay.
They've told us
as long as they have the skills.
Because they're developing the skills that they're being taught, they know exactly what they're getting, and they've told us, I mean, in our manufacturing council meetings, that certifications drive the price up. They don't necessarily have any more education than anybody else. They've just driven the price up by $1,000, and
so
they don't need it. They don't want it.
That's why you've seen us. We started with Connexus, then we went to MPro.
Just so folks at home can hear.
So we started with Connexus, and then we went to MPro through Ivy Tech, and our employers are saying they're still not getting the skills we need them to have. Now, they may be getting skills to go other places and do other things, but in our community with the jobs we have, MPro was not providing those skills. And so that's when we began to look around, and that's when we came across the Wright State, the Lake Campus curriculum. And that's why now we're moving to it. And so, we started 4 years ago. And for us, this is the 3rd program we've looked at in those 4 years. And it's been all pushed by industry and by this council of manufacturers that have said, we want these kids to have skills specific to what we do. And that's tough because, in education, it takes a while to make those changes. And we've had to be very flexible. Our faculty has had to be very flexible. I mean, our manufacturing guys now has been through 3 different series of trainings to be able to teach that curriculum, and then we're going to utilize the instructor at the John Jay Center too.
And that's also why the project-based learning and the work-based learning being embedded in the curriculum, no matter what program we go with, is absolutely imperative.
Well, and really with the project-based and the work-based, really what you've also done is make it competency-based, because now we're worried about skills and competencies as opposed to the other things, right? Which is what we talked. Yeah, yes. So do I finish my others, or you're going to jump in now?
On the work-based learning, have you found that being 18 years old is an issue, the age of 18, or how do you get around that? Because
I call it a myth. We do, and I know if you guys might disagree with me on this, but there are workarounds. We have seen some incredibly best practices taking place in other states where they started at 16 years old with, basically a third party being involved in employing, if you will, those students to help with the liability piece of it. But as long as there is a policy, a company policy in place, and it is structured to, of course, the safety of those students, and I can speak for manufacturing, it's very easy, manufacturing and healthcare especially, in the aspect of making sure that they have the proper training in place to even get them to that next step. So for manufacturing, it's OSHA training, it's the quality and safety training to help them with that next step. They may not be able to run a press, or they may not be able to work inside of an oven. When they get to those locations, or in the healthcare side, you're really starting with more of those stackable credentials of a CNA and working your way up. But every step helps that student get closer to their end goal. And that's the key. And the sooner we can get them inside those organizations, the better. So I'm taking 16 right now, and I'm loving it. Not all of companies are on board with that. And I mean, some of them even say with the, with the third party hiring of those kids, they said, nope, we're not willing to take that chance. And we're making baby steps though. But it's a challenge, but it's doable.
No, two last things, sorry.
Wait a minute, can I throw my 2 cents with that? With our manufacturers, what they've told us, they want seniors to take the classes up at John Jay, to be involved with the adults, because the maturity level is just not there yet. So, they're getting closer to 18. They're leaving high school and going into the workforce most likely. So, but any earlier than that, they were against sophomores taking some of these classes. They wanted it to be a senior level or higher.
So stay there a minute, because
Yep.
this was during your presentation.
Okay.
1.5 million that you've used for equipment and that piece, and I'm going to add a little bit to this. How do you stay agile? Because you referred to this of being agile, because this is another thing that industry talks a lot about, is how can schools be agile in keeping up with what they need to be teaching, right?
Right.
And how do you also do that with equipment? Because what's your thought on this 1.5 million? How long is that going to last?
Right.
And be real to students, right?
And be relevant.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's the word I was looking for. Sorry.
So what we have now is state of the art. And we also know that what we have now in 5 years, it could be completely different. But we meet quarterly with our manufacturing council. And to be honest with you, they support us with students. They support us with their time, the time, talent, treasure thing. But we ask for them to support us financially as well. And also, whether that's with real money or if that is gifts of equipment, which they do. I mean, when we need something, my teachers tell me, hey, we need a diaphragm pump to be able to take apart and put back together. I send out an email, and 2 hours later, I have 6. So they've really bought into this, because this is a need, and they know that they've got to put in their work as well. They've got to help us financially, and they know that when we go forward and they say, hey, we want one of the newest, biggest FANUC robots down there. All right, a trainer costs $80,000. How are we going to do this? And so far, they've written checks, they've given equipment, they've been great about that.
So one last thing, and then I'll ask the last question, and I'm going to shut up. I promise. One is, A, again, thank you. B, I hope you're prepared to have a lot of people ask you questions and want to do this presentation. And I would implore upon staff to cut this video out of this and put it somewhere where schools could go. Because one, I think this is a model. You are the ones that we were talking about, as with a lot of other schools, during the pathways of, we know there are school corporations that are going to step up to this, right? And you already did before, right? And we just made it even more possible. My last question is really a simple one. The skills track training, does that have, and I'm only asking this to inform us as we move through looking at math and some of the other things, does that include math training that's relevant in the context that's needed for the manufacturing?
Yeah, there's a deep in the green level, which is the maintenance basics. There are 8 credit hours. There are going to be 8 dual credit hours. 6 of those are in math. So there's a touch in just general math, but there's a touch of algebra, geometry, trigonometry, even some calculus. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of math in that. So.
Talked about an alternative to Algebra 2. That was one of the things we were looking at, was what type of math in that manufacturing could be a possibility as that course for people across the state.
because they call it like shop math over there.
Dr. Berger?
Thank you. Just a quick statement and then a question. As I look at communities all over the country, the manufacturing mix matters a lot within a community. Whether you have local independent businesses, subsidiaries, clusters around other industries, and what the long-term employment possibilities look like within a community. You see some that have dried up because most are subsidiaries of other companies, and business is going to act in their own self-interest. So whatever it means around job expansion or contraction affects the local community. So the nimbleness in which you align with these industry partners is also going to be very important, correct? Because things change rapidly. Tooling, whatever it is, changes based on the overall needs of technology and wherever that supply chain, wherever they're at in that supply chain. So, but my question is this: as you think about your work, I also commend you for work you're doing and the vision you have and what you've executed at this point. As from a parent perspective, if a parent were to come to you and with data, and here are some of the data points. When I look at lifetime earnings potential, upward mobility, transportability, enduring careers, avoiding long-term unemployment, underemployment, and almost every one of those metrics are directly correlated with educational attainment. And so you go from high school diploma to an associate degree to a bachelor's degree to a professional degree, and they're strongly correlated. What do you say to parents who say, I'm concerned? It's not about the job entry. It's about enduring careers. About what happens when I'm 45 years old with a high school diploma. Things have changed so dramatically, and now I find myself unemployed and no one wants me. And there's a lot of evidence of that as well. How do you counsel parents and students through those conversations?
All right, so 2 things. We're using that Wright State model. We go off of Wright State data. Since 2008, when they developed the Skills Track program through a Department of Labor grant, they've had close to 1,000 students run through this program. They just did some data capture at the end of last year. 98% are still working in industrial maintenance that have been through this. There's more, like I said, close to 1,000 that have been through it. 98% are working in maintenance. Average income, $87,000 a year. In our little county where median household income is $36,000, you got a lot of buying power. So second part, I've got enough of these. I think I have 8 of these that I know there's 9 of you on the panel, but we put this together. This is a strategic plan, but as part of the plan.
We have.
Oh, you do? Okay. So page 7, this chart at the bottom. I went to 4 different companies in our manufacturing council and I said, how do I get hired? How do I get a promotion? How do I get a raise? They all 4, luckily, had a 4-tier program. They called it different, whether it was an apprenticeship or whatever they had different lingo. But they gave me some money ranges, and they were all within about $1 of each other. So I averaged that, I annualized that. So again, in a county, $36,000 median household income, as a entry level with no experience, you're looking anywhere between $30,000 and $35,000 a year. This is all before overtime, and there's always overtime. And then as you get to the highest level, you're looking between $50,000 and $60,000 a year. And since I've made this, 2 of the 4 companies have increased wage. So this is so to say to parents, there is such a need. Right now there's 6 companies just in Portland alone that have 28 maintenance openings. There's jobs, and there's gonna be jobs. As long as there's manufacturing, there's gonna be jobs. So.
How will you know when the pathway is hit, like the saturation point for your job market? I mean, at some point, you will have trained enough kids where all those jobs are gone.
Sure.
And it doesn't make sense to continue with that particular pathway. How do you sort of monitor that to know, okay, maybe another year or two and we need to look at something different?
As we listen to our manufacturers, they'll tell us. But right now, we're drawing from 8 counties, and it's just going to get bigger. I'm getting calls from the south side of Fort Wayne saying we want to send people down. It's an hour away. And they want to send people to us because they've heard about what we're doing, they've researched what we're doing, they like what we're doing as opposed to what else is out there. We're going to get, I figure about a 45-minute circle around, even into Ohio, and that's our market because, yeah, we'll reach a saturation point maybe in Jay County, but there's as many cars from Jay County that go to Delaware and Blackford and Mercer and Darke County, Ohio, and further for these jobs. And there's people coming from those other places into our county to work. There's plenty of jobs out there because we're not the only place like this. The whole state of Indiana, the whole Midwest, anybody that's heavily into manufacturing, if you talk to them, there are plenty of jobs and they don't know where the people are going to come from. The governor, we talk about the 1 million jobs and there's a 300,000 person shortfall that's coming, in the next 2 to 5 years. That's what we're trying to fill.
I guess one of my concerns is with the state now transitioning to graduation pathways, there most likely will be a lot more programs like yours popping up.
Sure.
So while you have an expanding market, you also have an expansion of these types of programs.
Absolutely.
Probably.
And that's why we depend on our manufacturing council because we're training for industrial maintenance now. In 5 years, we may be working on quality control or information technologies. We're going to move with them. There will always be a need for what we're doing, but we're going to expand this. And, so there's always opportunity.
I think the other thing that I would add to that is when we look at systematic change, we're looking at foundational skills. And I use the industrial maintenance pathway as an example of that. If you are training those students, I'm going to call them students because they're all ages, with these skills and they master these competencies, they are going to be employable in many, many different careers. And so again, you're really, we call it laddering, right? When you're laddering your skills and you're able to lock that in. I know a lot of industrial maintenance professionals that have left the manufacturing world, but they've either started their own business, starting electrical businesses, or they've started other, just all kinds of things. So I completely respect your question in the aspect of saturation, but again, if we're looking at what these pathway systems can really do, and that is it's building competencies to keep people to be successful, no matter what career they go into. So.
I have a weeds curriculum question, and I just want to affirm or second Dr. Bertram's thoughts around how, if it were possible, that you could intentionally sequence the courses that you're talking about, because what I'm hearing is there's a basket to the left and there's a basket to the right, and the students end up halfway to an associate's degree, which strikes me as a missed opportunity if there was a way to intentionally sequence those courses to earn some outcome prior to that, rather than just walking away with 30 credits. I'm assuming that that's what you mean when you say in a technical certificate is about 30 credits, but it has to be an intentional union of courses. Have you had conversation about that, or is that something you would be interested in discussing?
Yeah, I think that's our end goal. But as I said earlier, we've had to adjust our programming because of the manufacturer's needs and demands. And so eventually, and Rusty and I were talking about this on the way up here today, we would like to get those kids in that senior year into the John Jay Center at the beginning of their senior year. Let them get those 2 levels, both the green and the white level certification, so that they can be hired by the employer then. Again, as he said, it becomes less for us about the certificate and more about the skills needed to go to work. I'm not minimizing that, but that's not for every kid. Not every one of our kids desire to go on and continue that education in a formal setting. They'll do it through the factories. They'll do it in the lower level of the John Jay Center. But they may not choose to go into that Wright State program on a campus per se. And so I feel like our job at the high school level is to provide them the opportunities necessary to meet one of the graduation pathways and kind of get them on track to college. I don't know that I feel a responsibility to get them through college or to get them that associate degree. I want to provide them options. I want to get them on the right track. I want to get them moving in that direction. But for the kind of kids we're talking about, a lot of them aren't making they're coming in at 14 or 15 years old. They don't know what they want to do. And so it's that junior, senior year where they finally say, okay, this is what I want to do. Okay. We'll get you into that Ivy Tech English course that can transfer to Wright State. We'll get you into that pre-calc Ivy Tech course that will give you that post-secondary math credit. We are doing those things, but it's very individualized to the student and what their needs are and where they want to go. And so, the M-Pro classes, I see us transitioning into the Wright State Lake Campus courses. And so I think we're heading there, but I think because of the adjustments we've made, it's never fast enough. And that's the challenge with what we do. These graduation pathways and this locally created pathway, which I'm not sure we are because manufacturing is its own pathway already. This is 4 years in the making. Those grad pathways start with our current 8th graders. So schools all over the state have to start today to be ready by the time those kids are seniors. And I think that's going to be a huge time crunch to develop this kind of program for our current 8th graders, knowing what we've done, if that's the expectation. If the expectation is that everybody in the state has to create something at this level with this depth in the next 4 years, they got to start today. And we have one. I would love to have 8 of these. And for us, I see healthcare being next. We're already talking to our hospital. They need surge techs, I think. Sorry, I'm not familiar with that lingo yet, but I'm learning. I see that being the next pathway we do. It's already a healthcare pathway, but it's specific to the needs of our community. And I think this has kind of set the framework for us to expand into different areas.
I would just encourage you to do that curriculum audit because it may be easier than you think.
Sure.
And just in terms of that sequencing, because then otherwise, what is the value of saying that they're halfway to an associate's degree if that outcome doesn't matter anyway?
Right.
So just a thought. And
I understand that. And we have sat down with Ivy Tech and said, okay, what will you take from Wright State? We've sat down with Wright State and said, what will you take from Ivy Tech? And we have the sheets that, our counselors can check off with our kids and go through those. And so I think we can do better, but I appreciate that. And then, Dr. Bertram, the question you ask about how do you respond to a parent? I think the message from us is if a 4-year degree is not for you, you still need some sort of training beyond high school. That's not enough in today's world to go out and get a decent paying job. And so we want you to have some kind of training beyond high school, whether that's a 4-year degree, a 2-year degree, a certification. You have to be a lifelong learner. And I think that's the message that comes from us and from our school to our kids.
Credentials matter. They matter in the marketplace. And just another point, I was speaking with the national manufacturers and I asked these questions. I asked the group, and there were several hundred people in the room. I said, how many of you have jobs today you can't fill? Every hand went up. I said, how many of you have high-paying jobs today that you can't fill? Every hand went up. And then I asked them, how many of you want your own children to have those jobs? And very few hands went up. They want it for everyone else's kids. And I see people who, and I believe in manufacturing and in that pathway. What I don't believe in is taking a high school student, put them in a job without them having a vision of what the next 45 years looks like. You mentioned that employers, how quickly they change in their expectations, how quickly you have to change. So if that's a 4-year time horizon or a 5-year time horizon, that means that job market is going to change 8 to 10 times for that student while they're employed or in their working life. So their ability to change is absolutely critical.
Sure.
And then as they're looking at transporting across industries or sectors, do they have the credentials that will allow them to do that, as well as the skills? So that was my question. And it's not a negative at all.
Sure.
It's just, I think, for students, and I love what you said a moment ago, that if you believe that you can get a high school diploma, go to work, and have an enduring career for the next 45 years, I think you're really mistaken. But if you will move into the workforce and continue to learn and build on these credentials, stack credentials, perhaps at some point earn a degree, your long-term economic prosperity is much, much greater.
The challenge for us is when we talk to these kids about the credentials and the ability to make $60,000, that's what they see. And so telling them you have to start entry level, you have to, I mean, you're going to make $10 or $12 an hour when you start. You know, our kids today want it right now, and they want, you know, to start at that level 3 pay. And so the challenge for us is getting our kids to buy in, getting them involved in the program, getting them to understand you're going to start at the bottom. Everybody does. And it's this education that's going to perpetuate you into those better paying jobs. And for us, it's trying to sell the vision of today's factory, because I think they still see it as their mom's factory, their grandpa's factory. It's not the same, and the skills are not the same. And so we're fighting that too constantly, which is why I think our numbers aren't where we need them to be.
But there is a conflict from a business perspective. Business doesn't go in saying, how much can we pay people?
Sure, right.
It's like, how much do we do and how do we minimize cost? So as wages rise, more and more companies are going to continue to think about how do we automate these functions, right? How do we take the human element? We don't want to pay $87,000 for a job, unless we have to. If we can avoid it, we're going to avoid it. We're going to avoid it by either automating or consolidating or creating efficiencies. So that was my point, is that, you know, thinking about from an individual perspective, how do you ensure these long-term enduring?
Well, and the opportunity at John Jay, which I just assume everybody knows because I know, but at John Jay, we have partnerships with Ivy Tech, Indiana Wesleyan, Vincennes University, Purdue Polytechnic, Indiana Tech, as well as Wright State. So there are opportunities, you know, for students who maybe get into the workforce and they tell them at work, hey, you've got an opportunity to move up, but you need more education. They can stay home. They can stay right there in Portland and get this education that they need, whether it would be through engineering, with some of those pathways that we have going, you know, with so many different things, business, whatever the degrees are.
Any other questions? Back to you.
Dr. Ernest, about a year and 4 months ago, we sat in Matt's office and we were talking about locally created pathways, and at that time for me it was just a concept. This helps me understand, so I've referred back to that conference many times. But and one of my questions that I always ask is how long you've been working on this, and I'm here from conceptually 5 years ago to then 4 years starting really getting into the meat and potatoes of this project. So I appreciate you bringing that up. As you talk to other school corporations, and I assume you have, what do you tell them about what kind of speed bumps should they expect, and what's the most difficult part of that project as it's ongoing?
I can talk just about the schools that I've been working with. And so we always caution people about quick fixes. And so don't look for a quick fix. Look for a system and look at what those on and off ramps will look like for that system to be able to continue to be innovative. So we kind of really encourage them to practice what we're trying to develop for our students, to develop for the core team or for the councils, if you will. No two communities call it the same thing, by the way. So I think that's the biggest caution. A lot of times communities will say, we cannot get businesses to the table. And I use my nibbling fish philosophy on that, is that a lot of times businesses have just been nibbled at for so many things that they just become numb and they don't answer.
So we always invite them to the table as a neutral party rather than a checkbook. And same for the educators. I mean, they have to be able to come to the table with an open mind and saying, hey, I'm not asking anything from each other, let's just talk. And that's where it gets started. And I hope that's answering your question, but we see that in the work that we're doing in all of these counties that I mentioned, but no two look the same. And we've also found in a lot of our counties that it is tied to doers. So making sure that the right people are at the table to make sure it's sustainable, and that the mission and the goal is being echoed consistently across the board, and nobody has their own story per se.
So for the school people, as you move from year to year and semester to semester, what's been your most difficult challenge to keep this project ongoing?
I'm pretty empathetic with.
Could I have the school people answer that?
Sure.
Consistency.
Consistency with what?
The curriculum. I mean, it's changing, and so we're constantly asking our teacher to change, and that's been a struggle. Is to find what fits for our manufacturers. Connexus was an opportunity to get us going. Was to introduce curriculum, start getting our kids moving in that direction, and then it became MPro and Ivy Tech, and now it's Wright State, and so. To find the sweet spot, I guess, the challenge was to find the curriculum and the experiences that our manufacturers felt were necessary. And we were fortunate to have someone within our staff that was already capable of doing that. We didn't have to go look. I hear from other school corporations, finding that person is extremely challenging. And so we all know that, and I said this earlier, the programs are only as good as the people doing them. And so to be able to go out and find that person, and Rusty can probably speak to the job hunt or to the instructor search for the gentleman we're using to teach the Wright State stuff. I mean,
You mentioned flexibility for licensure, and I appreciate you bringing that up. I know the department has been flexible, and would hope that the department will remain flexible for ongoing projects that'll be popping up across the state. So I appreciate you bringing that up. What happens, maybe you haven't had this, what happens to a student who gets a couple years into this and says, uh-oh, this isn't for me, I need to redirect my thoughts regarding my education. Sure. And I know you've had this happen, so how is that handled within your school corporation?
Jay County High School is fortunate, and we run a block schedule.
Block schedule.
So we offer 80 credits. It takes 46 to graduate. So 92% of our seniors graduate having had a vocational course. And so there are a lot of opportunities to come on and off those pathways. We'll have students that will have concentrated in 2 or 3 different pathways. Now, that costs us a little bit extra money. It costs us, with vocational funding, with the federal Perkins dollars, it costs us about 2 additional teachers to run out of our general fund, above and beyond what the federal dollars pay us. Now, the challenge with that is that changes every year, that funding and those funding formulas, and the time that's released oftentimes does not coincide with our scheduling. And so we're always a year behind reacting to that. And we want to offer our students opportunities to become pathway concentrators and completers in high-wage, high-demand jobs. The problem is, always feel like we're a year behind. And our vocational funding, when the formula changed last year, we lost about 12%. Now that there's no shared dollars, I think we'll probably lose another 8 or 10%. And so every year that block schedule is always discussed as one of the options we're going to cut because it costs more money. My fear is when we do that, we're going to take a ton of opportunities away from kids. And so I fight that as hard as I can, because I feel like it's our responsibility to provide opportunities for kids. We also offer a very robust dual credit program. We gave away over $300,000 worth of Ivy Tech credits this year for free for our students. So we're very proud of the fact that we do, that associate degree, the academic piece, we feel like we do well. Plus, we also have a vocational a great vocational program, and it's all due to our schedule.
Well, let's flip that question. And if somebody's a year, a semester, or 2 or 3 into their experiences and want to get into this program, is that possible?
Yeah, what we would do is forego that sophomore, that intro, that 18-week, 1-semester course. And as a junior, we would put them in that full manufacturing one. What they would miss is, here are the different opportunities within manufacturing. And what they would get is, this is more industrial maintenance kind of things.
In your opinion, is block scheduling a requirement for this kind of a program?
Yeah, it sure makes it easier, because if I'm on a traditional 7-period day, I can earn 56 credits, but I'm probably going to take a study hall, so that's going to put me at 48. And if I'm in band or choir, I may have one opportunity outside of my required courses to get into a vocational class. And I'll be honest with you, we attract students from other districts because of that.
That was my next question about other electives. Does it eliminate the fine arts kids?
It would, yeah, it would, because they're going to be in your arts, but there's no pathway toward graduation in those fine arts classes right now. To my knowledge, there hadn't been a locally created pathway in fine arts to provide a graduation opportunity. So if I'm looking at what I'm going to reduce in this, share this, I don't know if I should or not, but if I'm looking to reduce, I'm going to find opportunities for kids within that graduation pathway, which means that they're going to be a concentrator in a vocational program, and that's not fine arts. Are they important? Absolutely. Would I love to find an opportunity for a kid to get a locally created pathway in fine arts? Absolutely. But I don't know, because it's not a huge demand in our county, what a program like this looks like in fine arts. I hope someone in the state creates it, because I'd like to copy it. But it's not there yet.
You mentioned dual credit in manufacturing. Some have up to 18 hours in dual credit in manufacturing.
Yeah, through Ivy Tech.
Do you know that number off the top of your head?
Do I know how many of our students completed all 18 credits? It would not be, it's probably.
Actually, I think you said up to 18.
Up to, yeah. Well, of our 26 seniors that just left us, 25 of them had dual credits in manufacturing, ranging from 3 to 18. Depending, again, on how serious they were in that. Started. Because we have so many opportunities that they dabble in a lot of different things. And that's probably the challenge I have with focusing them to finish, because we do that. If there's a disadvantage to block scheduling, there it is. We offer so many different opportunities in high school that they take all of those opportunities and they don't focus sometimes like we want them to into one area to finish it.
I'm not sure who this question goes to. And the comment was made, these are not cookie cutter plans, programs. And they can't be, I think a direct quote, we can't be plopped into another community. So does this, Alicia, I guess maybe this goes to you. Does this go to our library, our statewide library? And what does that mean? While you're at the microphone, are we voting on this today? What's happening with this?
No. So to answer the second question first, no, you're not voting on it. It's because it can already meet the existing bullets. There's no need to officially approve it. I mean, you've already essentially approved it when you approved those 8 bullets. So because they're able to achieve grad pathways by what they're doing, there's no need to approve it. But it will go into a library for pathway practices that it's housed on the department's website. So to Dr. Ernest's question, we have the PowerPoint, their application, their pamphlet, as well as like curriculum. Chad provided a lot of information in his application, so we're going to put all of that on their on the DOE website so people can review it and look to them to perhaps not just take it and plop it in, but create a program similar that's reflective of their community.
So we're not really approving at this level all LCPs, and some of them for some reason I'm missing the concept of they're already there, so we don't have to approve it?
Yes. Yes. Because their students will be a CT concentrator, which is 1 bullet. They may earn an industry credential, which is 1 bullet. They may get those dual credits, which is 1 bullet. They get the work-based learning, which is box 2. So they're already there. So there isn't a need to approve them because they can already do it under the current system.
So how many LCP apps have we received while you're at the microphone?
Yeah,
Alicia? Have we received? And then the follow-up question, how many have met the standards?
So we have received 9, including Jay County and Batesville. So those two, since they were considered best practices, they've met the standards in and of themselves. And then we had a Greater Clark come through last time with their civic arts pathway, so that's a third. And there are a few more in the hopper we're working with to see if we can get them there.
Okay, so you look at them, they don't meet muster, but you go back and kind of guide them and say, if you think about this
We give them a lot of
modification.
feedback, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I had another question, but it slipped. So,
You know how to find me. You know
yeah, I
that
do.
later.
Thank you, Alicia.
Yeah, thank you.
I want some more clarification on this question.
Thank you.
Because
That's where I was going.
There's an application
Mhm.
for approval of a locally created pathway
Yes,
from Jay.
yes.
It's on the agenda as a locally created pathway. It's under best practices.
Mhm.
Why do they have to go through an approval process and fill out an application if the end result is they've already met all the other requirements, they don't need to do that? I'm just thinking for other school districts, if that's the case and they meet all the criteria, then they don't have to fill out an application and go.
Correct. I think a lot of it is that because this is so new, it hasn't been implemented yet, there's still confusion around how much flexibility is within those 8 bullets. I was talking to a different school district or a consortium of districts that was looking to do an LCP, but they realized they can achieve what they want to do within those 8 bullets. So I think as this starts to roll out and schools start to implement this and see what is possible, I don't think we're going to see those kinds of applications. We'll see more like those Greater Clarks, which are completely outside the box. So it's not for approval because, again, you've already approved those 8 bullets. They're meeting those 8 bullets, so they're exceeding the expectations.
I'm just thinking, I don't want schools to have to go through this entire process.
Oh, I completely agree.
If they can meet the requirements, they don't, and they fill out an application, essentially they didn't need to fill out.
Correct.
It was my understanding that this.
Need to come to the mic.
Yeah. After going through this process, because I sat on the committee that helped create the application, it was my understanding that because this was in the manufacturing field, and we already had a manufacturing pathway created through the state, that this would have fallen under that. And if it would not have been in manufacturing, then we would have had to fill out the application. Of course, we didn't know that till the process was ended or ending, and so we'd already done that.
You'd
Does
already
that make sense?
Before this was ever.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Right,
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
that's the deal, and then when the committee looked at it, they said, I think that's the history we're looking for. When the committee looked at it, they said, whoa, you've gone above and beyond, it's already
a pathway.
Yeah, to your point though, Vince, you're right, but I think part of that's solved now that we do have, you started this, bless your heart, long before all this other was done, went ahead and hit the ground running.
Yeah, which is why when we saw the grad pathways come out, we weren't hugely concerned because we have a robust vocational program. We were trying to figure out ways to increase the opportunities for our kids, and we thought this industrial maintenance pathway would be a good way to do that. It just happened to fall into a pathway that was already created.
This is or is not within our definition of a locally created pathway. It is not. Okay.
And that, somebody said it earlier, we use pathways for a lot of different things. We have the vocational pathways, the grad pathways, now this locally created pathway. It is confusing to us. I was involved with it from the beginning, and it still wasn't clear to us. So I don't know if you can help us with that, but as high schools across the state, we'd appreciate some way to change the lingo so that it's not all the same.
Well, maybe somebody from Jay can help me with one aspect that I've totally been perplexed by regarding this. How is it that Jay County, Indiana, came to be named after the first Chief Justice of the United States of America, that was the governor of New York? I'm just kidding, actually. Unless you have the answer. If you have the answer, I've always wondered about that.
Jay County was being settled about the time he was the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, just named after a founding father. Adams County to the north of us was named after John Adams. But the fun fact, Jay County is the only one in the United States.
Sounds like a locally created pathway.
Thank you.
It is, yeah.
Come up with another one. It's good.
Thank you very much for coming in. And your program is absolutely amazing, and I hope that folks reach out to you and try to mimic what you're doing. It's much easier to borrow stuff than it is to create it from scratch. I know that's why you're here today. So, yes, thank you very much.
Good job.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Our project-based learning best practices moved to August, correct? Has everyone had a chance to review the consent agenda? And if so, is there a motion to approve?
I want to make one statement before we do that. I am going to recuse myself for one item under consent, and it's item E in the 2018-19 CT Pathways Plan, just in the potential conflict of interest with Project Lead the Way, and PLW is specifically, explicitly mentioned in that item, so I'm going to recuse myself.
Move to approve consent agenda.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. New business. Moving on. Freeway accreditation, Israel School of Excellence.
So we have on the agenda today 2 schools that are requesting freeway accreditation. Board staff has provided all the materials that they've given us, as well as a summary in the memo. We have representatives from both schools here to answer questions. So entertain a motion, or welcome to have them come up and answer any questions.
Any questions?
One.
Yep.
Okay. Make a motion to approve.
Second.
Motion to approve and a second. Roll call, please.
Well, now it's time for questions. And I don't think I have a question, but just a comment. Okay?
Yes.
Okay. And I want to specifically address the Israel School, and folks, thanks for the information you sent to us. Quite comprehensive. Where are we? Okay. So my concern was, and as a former superintendent was, in our board policies, we always had to put in nepotism. And I see the Lawanda Hurst. Are you here, Lawanda? Welcome. Lawanda Hurst is the administrator teacher, and then on the board is your spouse. Is that correct? Okay. I'm going to vote for this, but just as a word of caution, somewhere in your policies, because I didn't see it anywhere in there, look up the nepotism law statute and get that inserted into your board policy so that there's no question about where monies flow and how monies flow within your school district. Just a word of caution. And I speak from experience because we had to add something in one of my school districts to make sure that we were covered under that law. And I think it came about in 2012. So just a word of caution. But thank you for the information you sent. Thanks.
Roll call, please.
Just for clarification.
No, I just wanted to make a comment. That's not anything to be included in any sort of a motion or follow-up motion.
Yes.
Yes.
Dr. Freitas?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Henry?
Yes. Yes.
Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Ms. Wicker?
Yes.
Yes.
Motion carries. Congratulations. Moving on, freeway
Thank you for
accreditation, Alcock Foundation Academy.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Dr. Bertram?
Yes.
Dr.
Yes.
Dr. Freitas?
Yes.
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 Mr. Walker?
Yes.
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 Dr. Yeager?
Yes.
Yes.
Motion carries. Congratulations. Choice Scholarship Waiver Request to Rising Christian Academy.
EJ, I'd just like to make a motion to approve the staff memo.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Dr. Bertram? Yes. Dr. Ernest?
Yes.
Dr. Freitas?
No.
Yes.
Dr. McMahon?
Yes.
Ms. Sboe?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
I'm going to have a point as to whether or not that's legally significant as a motion. Actually move to approve the staff memo, or do you have to actually take explicit action on the item?
So if I understand correctly, the motion was to approve the proposed determination contained in the memo, which would be an appropriate action. Does that answer your question?
Well, the motion was to approve the staff memo. That's
Staff memo's recommendation.
Oh, yeah. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't hear recommendation. Yes.
Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Dr. Yeager?
Yes.
Yes.
Motion carries. Moving on to resolution, graduation pathways policy guidance.
Mr. Chair, once again, I'm going to recuse myself from this vote. Thank you.
That's it.
Didn't realize it'd be
Other
back.
questions? Board members?
So just to give a brief overview, so we talked about this May 24th at the work session. Between then and now, there have been some edits made to the document. I would argue nothing of real substance has changed. There's just been a lot of clarification and rewording. The board member edits that were suggested at the work session have been incorporated, such as clarifying the July 1st prior to freshman year to September 30th post-graduation, clarifying the ASVAB minimum score at 31. There was also some clarification needed around a CT concentrator. There was confusion around the definition between a CT concentrator and a Perkins CT concentrator. The course sequencing has to be the same for both. The only difference between the two is that for grad pathways, that C average is required, where for Perkins it's not. But the courses are the same. So that was also included, as well as a couple of other edits that were suggested during the work session, but also during follow-up meetings with practitioners and with DOE.
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
I'd just
Roll
like to
call.
make a comment
Yes, sir.
as I said in our call yesterday, but I'll say it publicly, I think the staff and particularly you, Alicia, did a fantastic job on this. Comprehensive and thorough, and so commend you for your hard work on that. Thank you.
I do want to echo that. I know how hard you've worked on this and how many folks you've reached out to, because let me know that you're talking about them not only from the state, but also on national expert level. So job well done on this.
Ditto.
Okay, roll call, please.
BJ, are we voting on these separately?
We're voting on, do you mean separating the guidance?
Are we voting on the resolution and then voting on the guidance, or are we voting on this together?
It will be joint.
Thank you.
Yes. Roll call, please.
Yes.
Dr. Freitas?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Ms. Sboe?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms.
Yes.
Yes.
Superintendent McCormick?
Yes.
It is 10:30. Do we want to, before we move into discussion reports, do we want to take a short break or do we want to roll on in?
Let's take.
We will take a break. We will reconvene. We'll take 10 minutes. We will come back at 10:35, please. We'll take 9 minutes.
We'll just like get the little portable heaters, you know?
Maybe we can, hot hands are on sale.
We just need more public comment so that there'll be more people in here.
Warm it up.
I believe it's going to start.
Bring a blanket. A cool blanket or something. Seriously.
That's right.
Let's go.
They're great people.
Okay, discussions and reports. Distressed Unit Appeals Board presentation. Welcome.
I do have a PowerPoint, but I'll start talking and we'll get it set up when we get there.
Looks like
All right,
Ron
thanks,
can
Ron.
handle it. Thank you, sir.
All right. Hello, my name is Courtney Skopsma. I serve as the Executive Director of the Distress Unit Appeal Board. Today I'm actually here presenting on behalf of the School Corporation Fiscal and Qualitative Indicators Committee. My purpose of being here today is to provide you with just a general feel for where we're headed with this committee. It is a brand new committee, and so we're very much at the start of this process, but we wanted to ensure that you were aware of what steps we'll be going through as we move through this process, what our requirements are, and certainly if you have any feedback for us, we would appreciate that at this point in time, and then throughout the process as well. I'll give some opportunities to continue to interact with us as well. So. All right, the Fiscal and Qualitative Indicators Committee came out of House Enrolled Act 1315 from the special session. In that, it creates a whole section specific to financial condition analysis and then also establishes this particular committee. The goals of the committee are threefold. First, our goal is to identify indicators, fiscal and qualitative indicators, that we can use to evaluate school corporation fiscal health. Identify when a school corporation may be heading into fiscal distress. Second, as we have those indicators identified, the committee is also tasked with putting together how we will present those indicators on a public web page. Ultimately, this will end up being housed most likely on the Distress Unit Appeal Board web page. But those indicators, as they go up onto the web page, they need to be in a dashboard format, an easily searchable graphical format, as well as having the data that is available to be downloaded. So for those who want to do their own analysis, they can pull that data down and do further analysis. Lastly, the committee is also tasked with identifying how frequently we would go through and update these indicators. So while we are on a set time frame here in 2018 to get the first round of indicators up and going, this is an ongoing process. And so I'll talk a little bit towards the end about what happens after we release the indicators. What we're going to end up getting to would be a situation where several years down the road, we're going to have school corporations at various parts of this process, just based on each new round of indicators that we release. In terms of the indicators themselves, at this point in time, we don't know what those indicators may be. We have not started that discussion. That is actually something that we will be starting tomorrow at a committee meeting that we're having tomorrow. The statute itself does provide some different examples of potential indicators. It's very clear that these are just potential indicators, so whether these make it into the final cut or not remains to be seen. One other thing, though, that the statute does really look for would be that we would be doing a trend analysis. So we don't want to just look at an isolated year or two. The statute asks that we would look at a longer time frame. In the statute, they propose a 7-year time frame. So we have spent some time already trying to work through what data is currently available and what data we would have over that period of time. In terms of some sample fiscal indicators, these are just some of the examples as we think about revenue, looking at ADM, which ultimately will trigger your tuition support, debt to AV ratio, operating deficit surplus. Those are some different ideas that are out there. Statute also provides some different ideas on qualitative indicators. These we are trying to sort out exactly how we will capture these. A little less easy to capture than the data that we would get through, say, the Form 9 with the Department of Education. But things like a school corporation missing debt payments, we should be able to see that through the state intercept program. If a school corporation has missed payroll or has past due vendor payments, those are likely things that we can pull out of State Board of Accounts audits. So we are working closely with other agencies as well to see what data they have available that we may be able to utilize in this process. In terms of our overall time frame, the statute requires that the first round of indicators will be made publicly available by January 1st, 2019. So not a lot of time for us to complete our work. And prior to the actual release of the indicators, the committee has to present their proposed indicators to the State Budget Committee. So at this point in time, kind of working backwards from January 1st of 2019, we are targeting, hopefully taking the indicators to State Budget Committee in October, assuming that they have an October meeting. So our committee meetings that we have scheduled to date are largely focused here in June. So we started our first meeting in June, and we'll go through September.
Courtney, could I interrupt real quick,
Absolutely.
please? So I wasn't familiar with this legislation. So this was just adopted in the last session. I guess I must have overlooked it, but I think it's great. So you're basically tasked with evaluating and kind of coming back with feedback on, the state of affairs at all the school corporations. Kind of like make sure, you're evaluating a number of factors and you're determining which school districts are in potential fiscal jeopardy.
Ultimately, yes.
Okay.
This first step, and what we're really focusing on here in 2018, is to prepare these indicators for all school corporations. So in some cases, yes, that may show, hey, there might be a problem here with the school corp, and in other cases, I'm sure it will show that this is a very fiscally healthy school. What will happen after we release the indicators is that there's a next part of the process where we'll take the results of the indicators and then start to narrow down, here are the school corporations that we're actually concerned about, and then there are a number of different interventions through the Distress Unit Appeal Board that we'll go through to dig in further, identify whether those indicators are accurate, did they really show what we thought they showed, or perhaps, as we've seen before, a lot of times there may be a negative indicator, but there's some story behind it. There's a reason for it that is easily resolvable. And so we will dig in further in 2019 on those school corporations that we have concern about.
And so when you look at the 7-year trends, is that looking backwards or looking forwards?
Yes, we'll be looking backwards.
Okay.
Now, what we are contemplating, or something we have talked about at our first meeting, one thing that we talked about at our first meeting in June was what has been done in other states in a similar vein. And one thing that we found was in New York, they have a fiscal stress index system. And one thing that they offer would be they look backwards, but then they also provide a spreadsheet that a local government can download and drop in their projected numbers for the next couple of years to see where that ends up impacting them moving forward. So that is something, again, we haven't made any decisions at this point, but that's something that we've at least discussed a little bit of, is there a way to make this not just a reporting of indicators, but also a useful tool for school corporations as they move forward.
Do you evaluate either adopted or proposed referendum for school funding as part of that?
That is, at this point, I don't know, but that is probably, that was one of the indicators that was listed in the statute, was identifying the revenue that would be generated from the referendum. One thing that we have to think about, and I always struggle with that particular indicator actually, is you have to be able to say, okay, if a school corporation has this revenue, would you view that as a positive thing or a negative thing? It's positive, obviously, because their voters were willing to vote for it. Was it a negative because they needed it? And then for those who don't have that revenue, is that because they don't actually need to get to that point just yet, or because they just haven't tried? And so that's one thing that I think we're going to have some pretty robust discussions on as we move through this process is, while we have a lot of data, how do you take that data and generate those warning trends? And how do you really say, well, this is a red flag, or this is just a really neat data point that the public needs to be aware of? So that's something we're just getting ready to jump into.
Thank you.
In terms of the committee itself, it's made up of a number of different state agencies, and then also a representative from the School Board Association. So I've listed the various folks who are participating. Per the statute, the DUAB appointee serves as the chair. For the state agencies, the appointee has to be an employee of the agency and then appointed specifically by the agency head. So these are the various agencies. We've got Department of Education, Department of Local Government Finance, State Board of Accounts, State Budget Agency, and then the Management Performance Hub. The statute also calls for the Management Performance Hub to assist DUAB with actually generating the dashboard format of the indicators. So we will be relying on them quite a bit for the graphical interpretation and the overall display of the indicators. And then lastly, we have David Holt from Warren Township, who is participating as the representative from the school. In terms of the meetings themselves, we did go ahead, and as we started to look forward, knowing we have a condensed time frame here, we've gone ahead and set a number of our meetings. Now on these slides, I say that these are our anticipated committee meetings, and I say that for two reasons. One, if we identify that either A, we don't need a meeting, which I find unlikely, or potentially that we need more meetings, we certainly will add to this as needed. And then secondly, on each of these, I've listed out what our expected agenda items would be for those meetings. Again, that's going to be fluid as we go through this process. So we did hold our first meeting on June 28th, 2018. It was very much just a foundational meeting, trying to get the committee together for the first time, doing introductions, laying out the overall time frame and process, and then we had a discussion on, for example, the state, other states and what they are doing. We discussed what type of data each of these various agencies has. So I think that's also an important aspect of this is the indicator process is not supposed to generate additional reporting requirements for school corporations. My previous role was at the Department of Local Government Finance, and so I know full well that the school corporations already do a lot of reporting. So we want to ensure we can use the data that they already are providing to us. And then lastly, we also did actually have MPH provide a demonstration of some other dashboard systems that they currently have in place. In this case, they walked us through the Indiana Transparency Portal, just so we can see from a graphical standpoint what this could ultimately look like. The real work begins tomorrow. We have a meeting tomorrow afternoon. At that meeting, we're going to start with taking public comment. It's one thing that's very important throughout this whole process is that the public is engaged, school business officials, school boards, school superintendents. We want them all to be engaged. We want them to be contacting us and helping us along this process. So we're going to start by taking public comment. I'm hopeful that folks will be able to tell us either what their goals are for the indicators, or if they have suggestions on actual indicators. We're certainly happy to hear those. Then from there, we're going to jump in as a committee and start our discussion. I've hit kind of the largest three categories in my mind and put those all together for tomorrow because I think they all end up starting to overlap each other. So we'll be looking at revenues, expenditures, and fund balances. So I think that will lead to a fairly interesting conversation. My goal for that conversation is, I'd say, largely a brainstorming session. I don't know that we're going to be at the point tomorrow to say, yes, that's a good one, and no, that's not. I think for right now, we need to make sure we take everything, and then we'll come back at a later meeting and try to finalize, okay, these are the ones we actually want to move forward with. Our next meeting after that will be then July 26th, 2018. At this point in time, our expected items will include debt indicators, qualitative indicators, and demographic data. So when I say demographic, what I'm thinking is if the community overall is losing population and we're seeing a similar trend in ADM, I think that that's important for us to recognize that this isn't just the school corporation, this is perhaps a larger situation with that actual community. I think there's a fairly good possibility that our revenue, expenditure, and fund balance conversation may also bleed over into that July 24th meeting or July 26th meeting a little bit as well. From there then, we're going to take a little bit of a break and come back then towards the end of August. That gives us a few weeks there to sort out all of the different ideas that we've identified. I'll be working closely with MPH during that time so we can flesh out for each of those different ideas what that would look like. We also will be looking to test these indicators against actual data. Now, one thing that I've been clear with the committee about is I'm sensitive to the idea of separating the indicators from the outcomes. So what I don't want would be a situation where we believe this school corporation has a problem, and so we're going to design the indicators to show that that school corporation has a problem. So I really want the committee to stay as independent as possible. We do have to obviously test the viability of these indicators, but so we may be doing that more through blind testing, not really including names of school corporations, but at least showing that we have the data available to do this analysis. Once we've gone through that August 23rd meeting and really kind of finalized, here are those indicators we want to move forward with, we'll release a proposed draft of those indicators. Then we would ask the public to come back and speak with us on September 6th and give us their feedback on it. So really we've set aside that entire meeting just to take feedback on those proposed indicators. And then our last currently scheduled meeting would be at the end of September to finalize the document and get it ready to submit to State Budget Committee. So as I said, this is what we've initially laid out, but certainly we will continue to be fluid on this as we need to if we identify that this particular time frame just isn't going to work. All of our meetings are being held, they're all being held on Thursdays at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. They all are in the same conference room. It's over at 1 North Capitol up on the 9th floor. There's a large conference room in the hallway there. And then they all will also be broadcast through the DUAB webpage. So for those who can't attend in person, we certainly would encourage people to either watch it live or we'll provide the link afterwards as well. We also do ask that people feel free to reach out to us. We have a couple of different ways to do that. Certainly people can always reach out to me directly, but we did go ahead and set up a specific email address just for the indicators process. So as folks have feedback, they can reach out to us at indicators@duab.im.gov. Or we also have a listserv that we have created. And so as people are signed up for that listserv, which you can do through the DUAB webpage, we will send out notices for the various meetings, as well as when we have these different documents available, we'll make those available through the listservs. So that is really kind of the work that we're doing here in 18. I have a few more slides that gets into what's next, but before I do that, I wanted to see if you all had any questions or thoughts on our process that we're undertaking this year.
Any questions from board members?
A few questions here. Just as first, I think this is going to be great to have this variety of. Curious, when you look at credit rating agencies, what kind of alignment do you see with those agencies?
Sure. I think that is definitely something we are going to be looking at and keeping in mind as we move through this process, both from two standpoints. One, the rating agencies already have a very robust process. So seeing what they utilize and as much as possible maybe helping to mimic some of that, I think would be of value to us. The other thing we have to be cognizant of would be, as we go through our process, are we doing something that ultimately may have an impact on a school corporation's bond rating? So that is a comment that has come up several times already, especially from school business officials as well as from underwriters and things like that that I've spoken with. And We have a number of folks who are pulling together different information for us on that, and who have also offered to provide guidance as we go through this process. So we can ensure that we kind of strike that right balance between capturing appropriate data, but hopefully not doing something that ultimately impacts the school corporation negatively.
Going about establishing benchmarks. What is the appropriate debt to EV ratio?
Right. That is a good question. And that's not a question that I have a good answer to just yet. I do think that that is going to have to be a part of the discussion for the committee, is to work towards identifying what those benchmarks or thresholds may be. As we look past the initial release of the indicators, the next step in the process is actually for me as DUAB Executive Director to go back to the State Budget Committee and say, based on these indicators, here's what we're going to be looking at, and here are the red flags that we're going to be looking at.
Do you think it's the same for every school district?
I don't believe so, personally.
That's where I was going as well.
Yeah.
That based on demographics, based on the trend lines, and industry, the effects on AV, all these things are going to potentially affect districts differently. So you can trend line and see fine around a static benchmark, but compare it to downward trend on AV, you're going to run into a problem potentially.
Yeah, and I would.
How you interact. Last question I have is, how do you see this interacting with other taxing units within a community? The effects of those taxing units on a school district, or even things like TIF districts, or things that could impair AV, or what may look like a growth opportunity may not be.
I do think we'll have to talk through that a little bit more. I know school officials have talked through the impact of property tax caps and how that impacts their revenues, and certainly then you start to get into what's going on with all of the other units as well. Part of my personal opinion is that I'd like to focus as much as possible for these indicators on things that are within the school corporation's control. And so some of those things, TIF districts, and say what the city's doing or what the county's doing, isn't fully within their control. But at the same time, I don't think we can turn a blind eye to it, because it is a very important part of that story.
Now within their control, but it does affect their financials.
It does, correct.
Financial health.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's the purpose, is to understand a school's financial health, then all those actions could affect the school district. People need to know that. Like if you approve a large construction project in a public library, that's going to, selling bonds for that, that's going to affect taxes. What effect is that? People need to be able to make those informed decisions as well of other choices they're making. And that was kind of my point, is that communities are making choices about where they're going to spend their money, how it's going to affect their local schools.
I absolutely agree, and I think that that's been an effort that's been ongoing for the last several years in local government finance here in Indiana, is to try to make sure that all of the units understand better how they all fit into the one puzzle. And there have been some efforts even just in the last couple of years at the Department of Local Government Finance that tries to further emphasize that even before taxing units adopt their budgets, so they can really start to see, hey, if I do this, here's the impact on not just my unit, but other units as well.
One last statement. I think this is also a great opportunity to help inform the public around school finance.
Yes, absolutely.
To understand, like when you advertise a tax rate, that's not going to be your tax rate. How all that plays out and trying to have. So this could be a great way for the state to come in and say, we're going to help inform the public around school.
All right, just a couple last things then to give you the preview of what happens after this. I've talked about this a little bit already. So after we release the indicators, there's actually a first step that I didn't put on here, just to try to be short, but so one of the first things we'll have to do is actually go back to the State Budget Committee and talk to them about here's how we now intend to use those indicators to say, you know, where a unit or school corporation may be facing fiscal stress, and then also how we would view where things need to head financially for us to say that that school corporation is no longer in fiscal distress. So it's going to be an interesting look that really needs to be long range in terms of how we see these school corporations ultimately coming out of these situations. All of that will ultimately lead to a report that's due to the Distress Unit Appeal Board at the start of June. It's a report that I, as Executive Director, have to prepare and provide, where I will say to DUAB, here are the school corporations that I think we may need to look into further. DUAB will take that report and ultimately make that identification of the school corporations that they do want us to dig into a little bit further. The first step of that is going to be an assessment that DUAB Executive Director will conduct. So that's where I think these individual stories may start to come out. One thing that I have talked to school officials about, though, is with this assessment, while I do think that there will be very school corporation specific aspects of it, I think overall there will be kind of a base assessment, and my ultimate goal would be that that base assessment would be available for all school corporations, at least in a document format. So, hey, maybe they haven't made the list for DUAB to come in and do this assessment yet, but they're still concerned, they want to make sure that they're in good shape. So there's no reason for them not to use the same type of questionnaire that we ultimately will see with this assessment. Based on the results of the assessment, DUAB can then determine if the school corporation needs to move into a corrective action plan. If DUAB does say they need a corrective action plan, that is a requirement then for the school corporation to prepare that corrective action plan. They can have assistance through various state agencies, but we really want the school corporation to have ownership of that plan. Throughout the time frame then that the school corporation's corrective action plan exists, we can continue to update that as we move through it. In the statute, there is no designated end date for these corrective action plans. I think ultimately there's kind of two potential ways that the corrective action plan ends. One would be that they ultimately, however long it takes, they come out of this financial situation and we now say that they're fiscally healthy. The other would lead to what we call the watch list. So the watch list is something that's in 1315, and there are two different ways that a school corporation could end up on the watch list. One would be if DUAB says to them, you need to prepare a corrective action plan, and they choose not to prepare a corrective action plan, that will basically place them automatically onto this watch list. The other way to get onto the watch list would be that they have prepared the corrective action plan, and despite feedback from DUAB that they're not actually following the plan that they established, ultimately if they continue to not follow that plan and make progress, then that could place a school corporation onto the watch list. If DUAB does say that a school corporation needs to be placed on this watch list, there are various folks that we have to notify, including folks at the school corporation, superintendent and governing body, as well as then the state budget director, because ultimately before we can officially say that a school corporation is on this watch list, it will have to go back through state budget committee for further review. The watch list itself, in terms of what happens after that, that's a little bit less known at this point of what that really means. But I think what we're really looking at would be if a school corporation gets to that point of watch list, we're really contemplating that it's highly possible that their next step may be some level of DUAB intervention, whether it's emergency manager or something else. But that, I think, will be done on a school corporation specific basis as we move through this process. With that, I always just leave my contact information, so if anybody ever wants to contact me separately, you certainly are welcome to, but I'm happy to take any final questions that you have.
Any more questions by board members? Thank you very much.
Maybe just one. Thank you for your presentation. Is the underlying philosophy here that these school districts that get into trouble have to pretty much cut their way out of the debt or the financial trouble? Or is there any new state money that accompanies being on the list or interventions?
At this point in time, there is no new state money that is associated with going through this process. Now, certainly I think cutting is something we always look to first. In the situations that we've dealt with on the Distress Unit Appeal Board, though we're always very aware of the idea that you can't just fully cut your way out of these situations. You do at some point have to find a way to increase that revenue. With that being said, though, at this point there's no pot of money that is associated with this.
So in terms of increasing the revenue, is there any mechanism of it other than like a referendum to do that? Or?
I think referendum or finding ways to try to increase enrollment and bring back up the tuition support, slow down if you have a declining enrollment, something like that. But those are kind of the tools we have available at this point in time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. Would you care to share that PowerPoint with staff? So
Yeah, absolutely. It should be, yeah, I know it's up on the web already.
Oh, it's already up there. Okay, perfect. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much. Okay. Up next, apology. We have school quality reviews.
As Robin comes up, I'll be brief. Just wanted to let you know this is a follow-up from board action in October when we approved the scope for the school quality reviews. Because the DOE team is too humble to say it, I'm just going to say a couple things and then pass it over to Robin. This team did a dynamic job tackling this unprecedented number of schools. Several evenings away from their family to ensure these visits are 2 days and substantive, some of them with young children. They provided meaningful observation and feedback to these schools to make sure that this process was not just an intrusive process, but actually a beneficial process for each school. Throughout the process, internally, they were constantly reflecting on their own professional approach as well as their colleagues and just the process in general to continue to iterate and improve the process. And then lastly, continuous meaningful collaboration across agencies to ensure that this process is ultimately as meaningful as possible for the schools, which is what means the most. So that said, I just wanted to give a quick preface, because I know she wouldn't say it, and pass it over to Robin to give you some more information about the school quality reviews this year.
Thanks. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm toward the end again, but this time it's not 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so I get to say good morning to you all. It is my pleasure as the Director of School Improvement to come to you and give you a report on the school quality reviews that we did and the team did this year. I'm sure you all know the background on the reviews based on Indiana code and what you passed as a process for us to go into schools. We did have 28 schools to go into this year, which, as Ron mentioned, is an unprecedented number. In the past, it's been a handful of schools, but we had 28 schools that we went into in 13 different school districts. And these visits included a pre-visit where the team lead would go and speak with the school district and talk about what was going to happen, then going into the schools for those 2-day, very thorough visits, and using a technical assistance team that not only included people from the Department of Education, but people who were actually practicing in the field, so that the feedback given to the schools would not only be thorough, but also be very applicable. Then a report was created and sent to the school that gave recommendations based on the turnaround principles rubric and what was seen in the school. On this slide, you'll see that the technical assistance teams, throughout the period of time that we did these reviews, from January all the way through May, we had not only 23 Department of Ed staff members go on the reviews, but 18 principals from the field, current practicing principals, accompanied us on these visits. 13 district leaders from central office came with us on the visits, 10 instructional coaches, 23 teachers from the field, 14 expert consultants, 3 community members, and we spent 70 days out on the road conducting these visits. As Ron said, that includes pre-visits, time working with the technical assistance team to norm using and scoring the rubric. So this was a lot of time out on the road and in schools. When we want to think about the Department of Ed providing service to schools, we want to think about us actually being in the schools and knowing what's happening and what the needs are at the schools. So those are some great numbers, but as you look at the next slide, looking at all the stakeholders that we consulted with on the visits, we met with focus groups, did surveys. Throughout the period of time in focus groups, we talked to and interviewed and spoke with 988 students, 642 teachers, 563 teachers completed surveys, 239 family and community members in focus groups, and there were 1,748 family members and community that filled out surveys, and there were 780 classrooms that were observed. So that's just really some impressive numbers for the kind of information we were able to get. Some of the key themes that came from the reviews included there are some insufficient systems for improvement. A lot of our schools are heavily relying on making individual decisions that are inhibiting their consistency and effectiveness. There's an inconsistency in collecting and analyzing data, and then Tier 1 instruction is not well aligned to grade level standards and are lacking varied instructional strategies, rigor, and engagement. So as we look at those being the trends, now we want to see what's next. Now we've gone in, we've looked at these things, we've identified trends. How can the Office of School Improvement and the Indiana Department of Education help schools improve? Because that should be our #1 focus. So those 28 school quality reviews are really driving our work moving forward in the next year. We'll be offering differentiated follow-up supports, aligning the supports with others that are being offered by the department and other divisions. We're being asked by schools to come back and do follow-up work with them. Fort Wayne, Kokomo, Anderson, and South Bend have specifically requested our return, and we're working specifically with them based on the recommendations in those reports to help them improve, working with their teachers, working with central office staff, working with leaders, and understanding that this is the beginning. Going in and doing these visits was the beginning for these schools, not the end. It's not punitive. It's something where we want to now offer supports and give them next steps. We had 3 cohorts this summer with Jim Shipley and Associates, where many of these schools attended and learned about continuous improvement cycle, plan, do, study, act. We are following up with PLC training in September that these schools will be invited to. And then again, our team will be out in the field. With the consolidation of content specialists and the school improvement specialists, we'll be able to provide content-specific help for teachers and instruction as they look to make that instruction, that Tier 1 instruction, align better with the standards and have more rigor and student engagement. So as we look ahead to what's next for the 18-19 school year, the process was very successful, and we have few changes that we want to make. We are going to add another teacher focus group in addition to the one that we already have set up, and we'll survey our technical assistance team members to get their feedback on the process. We're intensifying the customer service piece of our process so that we will keep all of our information in a Moodle course so that people can access it online as they're preparing for the visit. And then the most significant change is that our SQR rubric, which has been aligned to the turnaround principles from No Child Left Behind, now with the adoption of ESSA, we will be aligning this rubric to the 5 essentials out of the University of Chicago, which the 5 essentials are effective leadership, collaborative teachers, ambitious instruction and supportive environment, as well as involved families. As you can tell, those 5 key essentials for schools are what make our schools successful. So that's what we'll be using as a rubric as we go in and do our school quality reviews. We do expect to have at least the same number, if not a few more reviews to do this coming school year. So as we're looking back and helping the schools that we visited this year, we'll also be looking forward to doing the same number of visits. I would like to take an opportunity to recognize my team because they are the ones who've been out in the field doing the reports. So if the school improvement team can stand up. Assistant Director Melissa Blossom, School Improvement Specialist Kelly Great, School Improvement Specialist Kyle Zahn, School Improvement Specialist John Purcell. We have our Senior Specialist Erin Stahlbaum on maternity leave. I don't know why she didn't want to leave to come here today, but we'll recognize her in absentia. And then Mark Keene, who's humbly not standing in the back, but does an amazing job helping us on these reviews, especially as we're working with central office staff. So I'm available for questions, or I can sit down.
Any questions by board members?
Did a nice job.
Great
Very
work.
good job. Thank you very much. Assessment update?
I want to apologize in advance. My voice is a little weak today, so I'm going to try to move quickly, but if there's a point that you want me to discuss further, just let me know. So we have several assessment windows taking place this summer in terms of retest opportunities. iRead 3 has been underway for several weeks. We did conclude an ACA window last month, and reporting has been completed for that. And then the iStep Grade 10 retest will begin very shortly as well. One aspect that I wanted to touch on briefly today is we've had a new initiative really focused on assessment literacy. This was part of the iLearn legislation that was initiated a few years ago now. But related to that, one of the things that we've tried to tackle first and foremost is really defining what an assessment literate individual means so that we can frame resources and materials both for educators and for larger stakeholder groups about how someone would become more assessment literate. So as a result of our collaboration internally, we've defined an assessment literate individual to be someone who understands the types and purposes of assessment. And this has been a challenge for several years in trying to have important conversations about the appropriate use of summative data and how some formative components can also contribute to greater understanding. Secondly, believes that assessment is an essential part of teaching and learning. Again, sometimes when we reference assessment, there's kind of a trigger to automatically think about the standardized state assessment, and so really trying to extend that understanding that assessment can occur every day. It can be really in the means of formal questioning as part of normal instructional practices. And lastly, using data to drive informed decision-making. Again, there are times when single data points are used with great stakes associated to students or curriculum that's being defined. So we are trying to promote a greater understanding so that people can be most mindful as they're making those decisions. So as we've considered this definition, again, educators are a valuable stakeholder group that we want to ensure have a great understanding of assessment literacy. However, educators must have these kinds of conversations with parents and other stakeholders as well. So we did try to frame that definition so that it could apply to several stakeholder groups. So last month, we actually kicked off our first professional development initiative around assessment literacy. We had 2 days focused with corporation leaders on these efforts. So we had breakout sessions that were focused on characteristics of quality assessment. What does a quality assessment look like? Selection of formative providers. We had some school corporations who have recently reevaluated who their formative provider would be. So they shared some of that process out with other corporations so that they could better understand process steps and what that might look like. We also had some corporations share some of their best practices in how they use and interpret data and also how they build some of those systems. And then lastly, we also had the opportunity to look specifically at classroom assessments and again, how those can be created with some quality best practices in mind. So our next phase of this work, we're collaborating with School Improvement to provide some more professional development specifically to educators this fall. And as part of that, what we would like to do is actually have the educators bring in some of their resources and materials and do some reflection and analysis based on best practices that we have defined in creating assessment so that they can internalize some of that as they're looking at materials that they use and potentially build some additional support if that's needed. And lastly, I'll just touch on the continuing effort we have to build our 2 new assessments, both for iLearn and IM. We had 2 meetings last month. The first was to create the blueprints for the alternate assessment. And then secondly, we did work on the PLDs for iLearn, which you had approved those statements as part of the agenda this morning. And then this week, we actually have our iLearn item review underway today. And then we'll be closely following that on Thursday and Friday with our IM item specifications. So I'll take any questions.
Any questions by board members?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Social, emotional, and behavioral health plan. Yes. Welcome back.
This will actually be a pretty brief update on the social, emotional, behavioral health plan because I did give you one last month that was a little more comprehensive at the June board meeting. Between that board meeting and this one, we have had a couple of updates, but not a lot. We have we're waiting. August 1st is when the governor's report is due, and we are waiting on that report to help inform our processes, but moving ahead with the work that we're doing. So the Mental Health Supports in Schools Subcommittee met on June 28th, and they'll meet again on July 18th. They are looking to bridge work between different agencies, specifically right now with Mental Health and Substance Abuse Task Force. They're working to look for systems gaps where they can then unify those agencies together. They're also looking at the need for schools to be able to identify those supports and resources before giving screeners to students. Because once they give screeners and they're able to identify what needs students have, we need to be able to make sure we have resources and supports to offer those students. So they're looking at screeners and then also the systems and agencies that they're going to be able to offer as supports. They would ideally like to have one screener used by all the schools and community health centers in order to allow for the results to be more easily understood and to keep from having children and families take multiple screeners every time they're referred to an agency or a support place. They would have to have another screener. If we can have one universal screener that everybody's using, that'll allow families to have a lot less confusion. And then looking at ways to access more highly trained mental health professionals for our schools, which is a great need. And then we're looking at ways to either share them between schools or make sure that they have access to them in some way. Christy Berger, who is our MTSS committee chair and also Title IV with social emotional learning, she traveled to Tennessee earlier this week for a 2-day conference and able to gather information on other states and how they are making sure that students receive social emotional learning every single day, which is a goal that we have for our students. She got examples of modules, online learning platforms, strategies, and information that other state agencies are providing to their educators so that we can provide those to our educators, and it is helping to build our MTSS resource bank. She's also currently attending a 2-day conference on trauma-informed care. The MTSS team has met, and we have scripted and created a video for all schools for awareness on MTSS. Dr. McCormick is going to be filming this video on July 25th, and then it'll be available on our website for all schools to start getting that idea of that MTSS framework. And we'll continue to roll out awareness about social emotional learning to all schools through some conferences that I mentioned at our last meeting. We're going to be presenting at IASP, which is the Association of School Principals, as well as the School Board Association and Superintendent Association conferences.
The
so that we
system
can
has
get
detected that a minimum number of lines are connected to this conference. Do you want to continue your meeting? Press 1 to confirm. If there is no response, the conference will end.
Yeah, so that kind of wraps it up. And those were the closing remarks. That's the wrap-up music from the Academy Awards, so I'll take that as my cue. Any questions?
Robin, you said she was going to videotape that on the 25th. Will that be immediate turnaround?
No, there'll be, I'm sure she's going to do a fantastic first take, but, Don will need a little time to edit that and get it on. It's usually not very long, but it'll take a week or two.
Thank you.
Would you mind giving me just a little more information about the screeners?
Yeah, so when students come into school and maybe they're identified as being at risk for some type of social, emotional issues, substance abuse issues, mental health issues, there are some screeners that will be given to sort of identify maybe whether it's depression, whether they need to see someone about anxiety, whether they need to see someone about different things. So those screeners are just going to have some questions on them when the student answers them, when families answer them, of what kind of help support systems they may need, agencies that they can be connected with.
So the students answer those questions?
The students will do self-assessments, even young students. There are screeners for, kindergarten and pre-K students, but the family ones, the adult ones for the teachers that they fill out, and the ones for the families will look a little different. The questions may be a little different.
Thank you very much.
One last question.
Sorry.
Are there any laws or regulations that you believe creating barriers for us to meet the needs of students, to identify and to meet those needs?
Yes, I mean, there are always some barriers of things, information that we can't get or be able to allow certain agencies to have access to information.
Or those things that would take legislative action to correct?
Yes.
Are those state regulations, state laws, or do they fall under FERPA? Primarily FERPA. So I'm just wondering from a legislative perspective if there are, obviously this is a really big issue. And
absolutely.
There are laws and regulations that could be addressed to ensure that there is a flow of information that's appropriate. Take the appropriate interventions to prevent tragedies or early. I think we should consider those and be aware of what those are.
Anybody else?
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
again.
Have a nice day.
Accountability timeline, Matt.
Last item. Good morning. This spring, the state board hit the pause button on accountability rulemaking, wanting to consider some additional options and wanting additional time. Board staff wanted to follow up with you to see if we were ready to pick up that discussion. We were thinking with the potential, if there's an appetite to reopen that discussion or continue that discussion, that we might have a work group sometime in August to maybe bring in a national expert to talk about what other states are doing with their accountability systems, that type of thing. But I wanted to open it up to the board to see if where accountability stood and we were ready to pick up and move on with that.
Any board members have comments or questions?
For one, I think we should pick it up and move forward and really look at, particularly as we think about career learning and the things that we are moving toward with pathways and so forth, just to ensure that is our accountability system aligned with what we're trying to derive through pathways and other initiatives. We may come to that conclusion, but we may find that the outcomes we're seeking are not aligned with the overall accountability system.
I would echo Vince's, I think.
Matt, are you looking at that being in conjunction with the August meeting? What?
So I've identified a few dates. It's going to be contingent if the board would like an expert to come in and just kind of provide ideas and give a summary of what other states are doing. You know, it might be contingent on that person's schedule. We can work to try to accommodate that, but at the same time, I think this might be a longer discussion and dependent on other schedules as well.
I would like to have the expert. And I think that would be a really good level set and a place for us to start and have a common set of facts from which we would be making recommendations. So for me, that would be a priority, to have that expertise in the room as we kick off the process again.
Who gets to pick the expert?
That's a good question. I imagine that the board would be the one selecting. We can begin kind of vetting potentials and circulating those names for your review and consideration.
I mean, because the problem is we'll end up in the same place. We'll just have 4 or 5 different experts that different factions of us want to believe in. And I mean, I think it would be a good idea one thing that I feel when we undertook the process previously is I never had a good sense where members of this panel were as it relates to even the type of change that's needed. Personally, I'm advocating for a total overhaul of our accountability system, something that is much closer aligned to what we now put in place with Pathways that uses very different metrics. But I would like to have some type of discussion about this sooner than later. Maybe not. I mean, I also agree with, there's probably some value to having an expert, but we need to get it back on the agenda and at least start talking about it. Because the longer we delay it, because we're already into 2020 before we could really do anything with this as far as implementation. And the system we have now is broken.
I think that's a move forward. And
Sure.
One of the things I want us to make sure we look at, we always talk about extra data points. And with our focus on this with the social emotional learning, that I would love to see if there are any other states that are using it as a data point accountability, because that important, and that gets monitored gets done. So
I would echo Tony's comments. I think we should have a discussion item where, we have a full-fledged conversation about it, so that we can, because I think we need to revisit that.
Okay, so I want to be sure I understand, a discussion item on the work group, or move ahead with the work group and identifying potential experts?
I would say, I think the consensus is to move ahead.
Okay. Well, I'll begin to identify dates maybe in mid to late August and start looking at potential experts for the board to consider. Great, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Matt, do you know states in which you believe they have an accountability system that is aligned or perhaps directionally where we may want to go? Have you identified, you don't have to name those states, but have you identified those states? Or is that the purpose of getting an expert to tell us where those, what's happening?
Yeah, I really haven't. The purpose today was just kind of see if the board wanted to kind of pick up and hit that pause button again to kind of restart the discussion. But we can certainly look into that and kind of follow up.
Then is there necessarily a need to look at what other states are doing from the standpoint of informing us, but then what is it that we want and how do we design that?
Absolutely.
And from an expert perspective, it's like I would like to have a survey of what's happening across the country, but I don't want to be constrained by that. And to Tony's point, I think if we're going to redesign an entire new assessment system or an accountability system, I should say, that I like to see people coming forward who know how to design that.
Okay.
Take feedback from this board and start to construct an accountability system that would meet our needs as opposed to trying to replicate something else.
Very good.
Thank you, sir. Seeing no other business?
Move to adjourn. Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We stand adjourned.
Wow. Nice work.
Everybody know?
Let's all take a moment.
Nice work.
Have a great afternoon.
It's not even new.
Found time.
I don't know what I'm gonna do.
And we got Northwest Indiana on there. Vince, I loved your last point. I agree 100%. I would almost rather bring someone in to help us build one as opposed to trying to take one. Alrighty. Well,
This is a gift to love.
I know.
I thought we'd wrap up a little bit. Yeah.
Approximately 2 hours. And then the stands on 65, just getting into that.
Makes no sense. Exactly. So,
It's on there.
Thank you.
Summer going well?
Yeah, I just got back from Seattle, so. My brother lives out there.
so we have 4 votes. It doesn't. How would you throw it all out? Yeah.
Is he running as an incumbent or as an open seat? Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, I think you meant the include one. No.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
But even if you opted in, they still get dinged.
Because we need to do
I knew Carl pretty well. I had worked with him. I worked for years. Was always friendly with him, but always knew he had some things up his sleeve.
Yeah, people would.
You would emergency.
Right.
Still, I mean, let's just talk the whole thing.
Yeah.
The whole thing.
So where you're at.
Well, you'll probably decide to get back.
I am so glad to get to visit with you.
It happens today.
Right.
You can always keep it, even if you don't like it.
They had to do that,
Good stuff.
You too.
I'm not trying to be nervous, but
Hey, Rob.
that's it.
But, you know, natural my brother has this habit called his,
That's how it is, yeah.
So, plays it, or
Right, you're right.
Definitely block or whatever. Yeah, so what would your husband do? What do you, join the prosecutor's office or fight along?
We would not volunteer.
Change jobs because, race. I'm a strong proponent of skills, development relationships, even moving to other places, which is something whether it's in state or out of state or whatever.
Yeah, just very much at a time.
Yeah.
Maybe shoot grab lunch sometime.
Yeah.
Let's do that. To know each other a little better. Did not no, I know. So, and I've been meaning to say that.
It was the,
Well, shoot me an email. Shoot me an email.
Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely. That sounds good.
My schedule is permanent and the rest is
Good. Good for you.
Free schedule.
Well, I will do that and we can go out and contract.
Yeah.
Have a great day.
All right, you too.
See ya.
So you enjoyed that report? Good.
Bye, Katie.
Just because we got focus. We were delivering every day.
I think $30,000 a year is to save a few nickels.
Yeah, that was the point. So
cents, 22 cents exactly.
That applies to every.
That position.
They're worried about year over year.
Sorry, we were interviewing for a new principal. I'm so excited. So next week, and if you don't mind driving to my school, I'll love to show it to you.
I will be happy to be there.
We will. I'll be here and see you next week.
Okay, see you.
So.
You say stick with me. Just want you to know that. How are you today? Doing well. How are you? I'm doing well, thanks. I am. Oh, do you know what? My office will go on the back. Yeah. So I guess I will. Feel free.
Guys, have a good afternoon.
Thanks, you too.
Yes.
Your family?
Yeah.
Yes.
My license plate or what?
Oh
I
my
know right away,
gosh.
this is a bad sign.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
These aren't the things you say during the interview. You can have me actually do it later on, but.
So just
Take the binders, do not take the binders. Okay? And then this is
No. You mentioned take time. That's it. I mean, take time. As soon as that meeting's over,